The decline in our nation's most famous boys' organization is just a chapter in the overall story of how we are failing boys. But dedicated parents still have options. For the Colson Center, I'm John Stonestreet. This is Breakpoint. February 8 marks the anniversary of the founding of the Boy Scouts, one of America's most beloved youth organizations. For over a century, presidents, CEOs, astronauts, and athletes have begun their journeys as scouts. On this anniversary, however, the future of this storied organization is far from certain. According to the Wall Street Journal, the Scouts have lost nearly 1 million members since 2008, and they now face lawsuits over the sexual abuse of children and cover-ups that go back decades. With the Mormon Church announcing in November that it plans to pull nearly 500,000 additional members out of the Boy Scouts, bankruptcy, even the end of the organization altogether, seems somewhat likely. Those who've watched this sad story unfold can't help but notice that the Scouts' quickening decline was only made worse when the group decided to betray its founding values. In 2013, the Scouts began accepting openly gay members, then leaders. Shortly after, they opened their ranks to transgender members, and then, despite the organization's name, to girls. Families who may have turned to scouting to guide their young men into adulthood are left wondering, what did the Boy Scouts really have to offer? As one dad who grew up in scouting told World Magazine, I realized it just wasn't the same organization. Well, the loss of the Scouts is just another blow in a culture already failing young men. The so-called deaths from despair, such as drug overdoses and alcoholism and suicides, are at a historic high, and young men have been the hardest hit. Time magazine reports that as of 2017, the male suicide rate was 3 times higher than the female rate, and youth suicides are at their highest point in 20 years. Now, many of these are attributable to loneliness and a sense of alienation, and more young men especially feel that they just don't belong and they aren't welcome anywhere. It's a process that starts early, even in subtle ways. More than ever before, schools cater to girls, slashing recess and PE time, requiring longer hours sitting at desks. Around 13% of boys are now diagnosed with ADHD, a growing number put on medication like Adderall and Ritalin. In our misguided one-size-fits-all understanding of equality, there's just about nowhere that boys can go to be with other boys. And of course, the epidemic of fatherlessness is at the root of so much of the despair that we see around us. And we talk a lot about gender here on Breakpoint, how God's creation of human beings as male and female is good and beautiful and life-giving. Oftentimes, we're responding to stories about the transgender ideology or same-sex marriage. But the plight of boys, including the fall of the Scouts, hits even closer to some of us, especially those of us raising boys. That task is harder than ever before, but it's not impossible. Despite the failing institutions around us, alternatives exist for parents who are committed to raising their sons to be godly young men. Trail Life USA is an organization formed by ex-scouting families, and they're dedicated to Christian values. It's been profiled in World Magazine and has a membership of around 26,000 nationwide, many of whom describe it as the spiritual successor of the Boy Scouts. And there's other organizations too, often hosted by churches like the Royal Rangers, the Royal Ambassadors, the Troops of St. George. Many congregations also host custom-made programs that are tailored to connect boys with their dads or boys without fathers to men who can mentor them. As sad as the Boy Scouts' decline really is, parents of sons do have other options. And by God's grace, churches and parents who believe what the founders of the Scouts believed, that boys are real, that they have a unique and God-given calling that should be cultivated, will continue to offer these alternatives. After all, if the church doesn't, who will? For Breakpoint, I'm John Stonestreet.